To tell the history of America is to tell stories of her rivers, to recount heroic legends of the men who traveled them, the explorers and trappers, the merchants and settlers, and the loggers who put the rivers to work in building a nation. Young America needed wood for warmth and fuel, for tall ships and great cities. The logger saw in the free-flowing river an efficient way to transport timber to the sawmill. The river drive began in New England. For more than a century, it was repeated in forests across America. All winter, the loggers cut timber and stacked it along the frozen rivers. In the spring, when melting snow swelled the current, the logs were pushed into the river for an icy trip to the sawmill. It was a hazardous journey. Dunkings were routine, bruised and broken bones common, drowning a constant danger. The men had to contend with furious whitewater, sudden drops in river level, and log jams so massive and unyielding a man could walk across them. Throughout the 1800s, the loggers moved across America in search of new forests. From Maine to the Great Lakes, through the South, across the great mountain ranges of California, Oregon, and Washington. And at the turn of the century, they came to the vast forests of Idaho. The Idaho forests offered big opportunities. They also posed big challenges. In Idaho waited some of the most inaccessible timberlands in America. Great stands of trees guarded by steep mountains and sweeping plateaus. Often the only way out was an unpredictable mountain river. Idaho saw many great river drives, but one in particular holds a special place in history, the drive down the North Fork of the Clearwater River. This drive occurred annually for nearly 50 years. For many of its final years, it was the only major whitewater drive in America. It ended in 1971 when a dam turned the North Fork of the Clearwater into a placid reservoir. The drive is now history, but the memory lives. The Idaho loggers who took to the river each spring still tell stories of the last great whitewater log drive in America. The first Clearwater Drive occurred in 1928, organized by a small lumber company, the Clearwater Timber Company. It eventually evolved into the Potlatch Corporation, today one of the country's major forest products companies. The drive began far up the North Fork of the Clearwater, beneath the 7,000-foot peaks of the Bitterroot Mountains. There were 95 miles of snags, whitewater, and shallows before the logs reached the Potlatch Mill at Lewiston on the Idaho-Washington border. The drive was an annual event. All year, Potlatch crews harvested timber high in the mountains. Earlier drives used water flumes to send the logs directly into the river. Beginning in 1956, the logs were stacked in decks along the river before the drive. These decks reached 40 feet high and up to a half-mile long. In May, when the river began to rise, the decks were pushed into the swollen river. Once dumped into the river, most logs rode straight through to the mill. But there were those that hung up on rocks or sandbars, that got caught in the eddies or jammed against a water-soaked log. that even got stranded ashore. The crew had to work these logs back into the river. It was hard, tiring work. The river drive was certainly no place for the timid, but as log drive foreman Charlie McCollister points out, it was also no place for the careless.
The work is hazardous, and we always have new men to break in. We always have to kind of place men where they can handle what they have to do, and the newer men are held back, so to speak, to keep them out of trouble.
The drive crew worked in teams. There were men in boats who used pike poles and rope to free logs snagged in mid-river and in the shallows and eddies. They worked with crews along the shores. The shore crew's basic tool was the peavey, a long steel-tipped pole with a hinged hook. The men used it to wrestle logs back into the current, and also for support to help them keep their footing in the fast-moving current. But whether a man was in a boat or on the shore, it was cold, uncomfortable work.
The only way you can stand the water is to have good clothes and keep moving. The men are practically required to wear wool underwear, cork shoes, and life jackets. There's a few people claim that they can't wear wool, but after working here a while, most of them come around to it.
Corked boots are the loggers' traditional boots for river work. They get their name from the metal spikes in the soles, called corks, that provide solid footing in and around the river. The crew lives on the river for most of the drive. Their home is the wanigan.
The reason for the wanigan is the fact that there's about 45 miles of river without any roads or any access to where men could get in and out to work every day, and that was the reason for living right on the water, where they could be on the job, and its only purpose is a place to live, board and lodging.
The wanigan was a floating kitchen, dining room, and bunkhouse. It first appeared on the Clearwater in 1932, 4 years after the first drive. The original wanigan was constructed of cedar pole rafts held together by lash poles of vine maple. In 1950, it was modernized. Army surplus pontoons were added to make it more durable in the whitewater. The wanigan used in the last years of the drive consisted of 3 linked rubber rafts, a central cookhouse and dining room raft, flanked by 16-man bunkhouse rafts. The kitchen carried a 2-week supply of food and fed 30 men at a time. The Potlatch Clearwater Drive was an exciting part of Idaho logging history. Some loggers traveled long distances to sign on. Each drive began with a genuine burst of enthusiasm that was quickly and literally dampened, as Assistant Foreman Clayton McManus points out.
The first morning when they start out, everybody is enthused, but when they hit the cold water, the novelty of the job soon wears off. Normally the water is about 37 degrees. Some of the meeker ones say they'll never do it again.
A good river drive man needed not only muscle, but cat-like agility to avoid injury. There was more likelihood of getting one's feet smashed than of being drowned. Safety was a priority, and a safe drive meant good teamwork.
Our standard procedure of working our way down the river is with 3 boats, with 2 boatmen and about 6 to 8 peavey men in each boat. One boat takes the right-hand side of the river, one boat takes the left-hand side of the river, and the center crew takes the center of the river. If the work gets heavy on one side of the river or the other, the crew will shift, kind of a shifting zone to help each other. They don't leave anyone behind.
This teamwork was demonstrated in the practice of brailing. It was not unusual for the eddies to fill with logs. The men on shore would gather them into a brail, a collection of logs held side by side. The boat crew kept the brail alongside the boat, eased it into the main current, and let it go. Jet boats were a recent development in log drive history. Originally, the drive crews used bateaus, wooden boats awkwardly propelled by oars and poles. Then came outboard engines, and finally, the powerful jet boats. But the new technology had its own problems. For example, the jet boats had the thrust to pull logs easily into the water. But this also meant a stubborn log could literally pull the boat apart, so the boats could not use steel cable.
When we started using the jet boats, we couldn't use cable. We had to use something we could get loose from the logs with. Boats were developed where we could pull harder. We had to go to polypropylene rope attached to cable, 3/8 cable and 7/8 rope. In swift water, we can't tie on with a dead hitch to anything. We have to keep a man on the rope all the time so that we can cut this rope free whenever we see fit to. These various innovations have made the work, it's not less skilled, but less bull work.
Yet the bull work, the back-breaking manual work of freeing the logs, remained the chief characteristic of the river drive until the very end.
The work is dangerous. It's hard work. It's miserable at times. It's just a job like any other job.
Starting in the early 30s, a small bulldozer accompanied the drive crew. It had its own raft. Maneuvering the cat into barely accessible places and using it to move tremendous loads took ingenuity, teamwork, and skill. If the drive was short on actual glamour, it did not lack for excitement, such as when the crew was hauling a center.
Centers are the most exciting because usually they're hung up in the front. The downriver side, there's a rock or shallow water or stump or something that's holding them there. Once you get those started, they will oftentimes unravel back into the deeper water, and you get quite a bit of action, quite a bit of excitement, and you don't know just when the center's going to haul.
The wanigan moved ahead of the crew during the day. It would sometimes move 2 and 3 times a day to stay ahead of the drive and be ready with a hot meal when the men arrived, tired and hungry.
We try to end up with the wanigan ahead of the crew at quitting time, and the crew works much better if they're working towards the wanigan than if they've gone on by it and know that they're going to have to return back upriver. They don't like to go back. So we call this leaning towards the sawmill.
The wanigan was bossed by the cook. He had 2 men to help him, one called the flunky and one the bull cook. These 3 men saw to the comfort of the men on the drive. When the crews quit work, they wanted to get warm and dry. They wanted to wash up, and they were hungry, more than ready for the big nourishing meals served up in the cookhouse.
We always have a beach fire, at the camp when the men come in, and they have a chance to stand around the fire and warm up and also dry out. They come in for dinner. We have hot meals 3 times a day, and they eat them all on the wanigan. Well, the food is very good.
The Potlatch wanigan was unique. Its name is based in logging history. The name originated in New England, where wanigan referred to the commissary or the bunkhouse. The Potlatch wanigan was both of these things and more. Yet as convenient as it was, the wanigan could never take the place of home.
We are confined. There's 16 of us sleep in a room, 16 by 22 feet. We have double bunks. And the tempers do tend to shorten, and I think it's partially due to our confinement, close quarters, and the fact that we work 7 days a week, and it is hard physical labor, and tempers do shorten, but after we get out to civilization again, everybody is happy.
Even after a long, hard day on the river, the men's work was not done.
The corks wear out walking over the rocks the way they do, especially the men on the shore rear. They'll sometimes wear out a set of corks in 3 days. And this is quite an item. That keeps them pretty busy. We have 4 shoe lasts, and they're busy every night. That takes care of a lot of spare time in the evening. The rest of it's seeing who can tell the biggest lies.
After about 3 weeks, the drive crew usually reached Asaka, at the point where the North Fork joins the main body of the Clearwater. The hardest work was over. Here, the river was accessible by road, and the drive crew found much of the work being handled by Potlatch crews using heavy machinery. On the main body of the Clearwater, the drive was more predictable. The whitewater passages that created the worst jams were passed. In just a few days, the last of the logs would reach the Lewiston mill ponds to be sorted and fed to the big saws. Spring of 1971, the wanigan made her last trip downriver. When she was dismantled and stored for the last time, an era came to an end. America will probably never see the likes of a great whitewater river drive again. The 1970s saw new ways of transporting the logs to the Lewiston mill. Today, Potlatch relies on trucks and rail cars. Yet even with modern machinery, logging is still demanding bull work. And the men still step lively when they hear a tall tree crash through the forest. Certainly, this new era has its own excitement and tall tales. But for years to come, young loggers will grow envious when they hear the old-timers tell stories of the days of the wanigan and the last of the great whitewater drives.